Hello, my name is Amy. Good morning. Last time I came to CIT, just to let you know, the CIT conference with an interpreting team. And so I was standing up on the stage. So it was 2010. Wait, no, it was 2000. It was the year 2000. It was a long time ago. It was a while ago. I was standing up on the stage and I fainted. I hope that doesn't happen again. I was young and innocent and maybe big-headed, and I was looking around at the room and thinking, "Oh my gosh, look at all the people." And I fainted. I see some of the same faces this time, but I'm a little bit more familiar with you all now, and hopefully I won't pass out again. If I do, you'll come help me. Okay. So I want to start with my personal story. You guys all have stories. I want to tell you mine. Well, not just my story, but the story of the interpreters I've researched, other CODAS stories. People who are like me, but not quite like me at the same time. I grew up in North Carolina, and my parents were both deaf, same as many of you here. So my parents were both deaf, and they both taught at the School for the Deaf for over 30 years. My mother's name is Mary Williamson. My father's name is Barry Williamson. So my father passed away in 2004. So that's how I was raised, two deaf parents. Same as many of you, not much different. I also have an older brother who's hearing. He's also a CODA. His name is Lee Williamson. He's also an interpreter. So he interprets in North Carolina. So because my parents both taught at the School for the Deaf, I went there very frequently. I spent a lot of time there. My father was a coach. So when your parents are teachers or coaches at the School for the Deaf, it becomes your life. So at my father's funeral, people kept coming up to me and telling me stories about my father. And I would look at them and I had no idea who they were. Because he, in part, raised them at the School for the Deaf. They were kids that attended the school. He was like a dad to them. So often I would leave home and come back to see what was going on in my hometown, but I didn't know very much because my parents were always at the School for the Deaf. So the kids at the School for the Deaf were like my family too. They were my brothers and my sisters. It made no difference that I was hearing. It's important to remember that. I know when you look at me, you see that I can hear, but deep down in my heart, I'm deaf because of the way I grew up with deaf parents. So that's my story. But other CODA stories are not the same, and you'll see through my research. Another thing that's important to remember is that I started interpreting in 1990. So the ADA passed in what year did it pass? 1991. So in the 1990s, it passed, the American with Disabilities Act. So they needed interpreters badly, and I needed a job. So it was perfect. So at first, I wanted to be in deaf education. I wanted to be a teacher like my parents were. So I started the deaf education program, and I found out that deaf kids are mainstreamed in hearing schools, and I did not know that. I had no idea that deaf kids went to hearing schools until I went to college to become a deaf ed teacher. Imagine that. So that started my process of self-reflection and what it meant to grow up with deaf parents, what deaf culture is, what ASL is, I didn't know anything about that before. I didn't know many of you guys learn about that in workshops about IEPs and such in classrooms. So it's very similar to me. I had no idea that ASL was even a language. I didn't know that deaf culture was a thing. I had no idea what in the world that meant. So I started in deaf education and I realized that I wanted to work in a hearing school to see what that was like. If I was going to become a teacher for the deaf, I wanted it from an insider's perspective. So I started interpreting in a hearing school to get that experience to see what it was like there. And so that actually started my process of interpreting. From then on, I just was an interpreter for about 26 years. It makes me feel old. So when I started that process, I want to thank Joanne Kenny, first of all. Well, that was her last name at the time. I'm sure it's changed by now. She's a CODA interpreter in North Carolina, and she saw potential in me. I also want to thank Lynn Wiseman, who also saw potential in me. They both encouraged me and guided me. I know that many of you have young CODAs who you're also guiding. You are very important. You were very important to them, making a difference in their lives of those CODAs. So I started the process of interpreting, and I was really frustrated about where to find training and workshop that was appropriate for my skill level. A lot of workshops had information I already knew, the other ones were too advanced, and I just really felt lost. Very frustrated. So I've heard stories from other CODAs who had very similar experiences, ones I've met at conferences. They were very frustrated. They wanted training, they wanted to improve their skills, but they didn't know where to start. Very frustrating. So I decided to go to graduate school and I wanted to do research, which I really like. So I decided to research CODA interpreters. So I asked interpreters whether they were deaf or hearing made no difference. The important thing was that they had a mother or a father that was deaf, at least one parent, deaf parent. So I asked them three different groups of questions. One had to do with demographics. The second group of questions had to do with language acquisition growing up, and the third had to do with how they became interpreters. So I gathered all their responses. Now, what I want to point out that I had 751 eligible responders. And keep in mind, CODAs tend to be late. They're like, oh, I forgot. I ran out of time. You know what? Too bad. If you forget, you don't do things on time, too bad. They kept putting it off. So some of them were not included. But 751 people that were eligible responded. That's more stories, more CODA stories. Have any of you taken up interpreter surveys and done research and gotten responses? How many have get that type of response, that number of responders? Very few. So I gathered up all their stories along with my story, and we all have stories. So I want to tell you a little bit more about those CODA stories that I've researched. So I've used a few different frames. Some of this information you may already know. For some of you, it may be new, but it's important that we're on the same page, especially you guys as teachers, for the teachers and students that you work with. We all want to be all on the same page. So, heritage language signers, what does that mean? So, I'll explain what that means. Next frame is children language brokers. We'll discuss what that means and why that's important. The next frame is how that applies to your work in teaching. So, what do we do? Often we feel like we're kind of stuck. We don't know, we run out of ideas. We don't know quite know what to do. Okay, we're done. You guys can all go home. So, first, we'll talk about bilingualism. All you guys as interpreters, you're both bilingual and bimodal interpreters. That means that you know a sign language and a spoken language. Two different languages in two specific modes. That's all of us in here. We're bilingual, bimodal. So it's really important to understand by the research how language acquisition happens and where it happens. So bilingual, bimodal project that I did. So there's a little bit of their work. I'm not a linguist, by the way. I got a bachelor degree in linguistics, but I don't know much about it because it was just a bachelor's degree. But it's important for us to look at the linguistic part of being a CODA interpreter. So maybe it's a little different way of thinking for you CODAs. Their native language is what? ASL. I want to repeat that. The native language of CODAs is ASL. And it's actually really quite sad that it's not the native language of most deaf people. It's very sad. And it's not okay. It's not acceptable. It's not okay that most of us CODAs who are hearing have a native language of ASL. We have access to that, but deaf children do not. And we need to do more to change that now. So this might be a new word for you. Heritage language. So a heritage language just simply means it's like I'll give you an example. Growing up in my area, from my life, there was a family that moved from Vietnam in my neighborhood when I was a kid, and their kids were about the same age as me. They were young. Their parents never quite learned English. They were never really fluent in it. Maybe now they are, I don't know, but back then when I was a kid, they didn't really speak English. Now, their children would translate for the parents from Vietnamese to English and English to Vietnamese. So because Vietnamese was their spoken language at home, it was their home language, it was their heritage language. But when they went to school, it was all English, or the store, or the movies. Everywhere else except at home, it was English. But at home, in that isolated place, it was strictly Vietnamese with their family. So it means what happened is their Vietnamese ended up being very limited to the home setting. So what do we talk about at home? Sleeping, eating, love, being angry, emotions, being scolded. And that's the same experience as CODAS have at home. They're signing, they're using ASL. Or if someone from another country, they're using their language that they learn at home. But everywhere else, it's English. And so English becomes their dominant language. So when I was growing up, so for CODAs, it's a similar experience. At home, they're signing with their family, with their parents' friends. If their parents have a large group of deaf friends, they'll have more ASL experience. Or like me, my parents worked at the deaf school, so I had a lot of uh, experience with ASL. So us CODAs all have very different ASL exposure. It varies very significantly. But some CODAs, their families might not socialize very much with other deaf people. Maybe they have only one deaf parent and one hearing parent, so the ASL exposure is going to be much less. The CODA tends to become closer to the hearing parent instead of the deaf parent. So the exposure is very different. So CODAs are just all over the place, very diverse experiences in language and language exposure and acquisition growing up. But it's important to keep in mind that these children still have very good receptive skills in ASL CODAs because their parents would talk to each other and they would see that. They would see that sign language at home from between their parents. Their expressive skills might be lousy and they might be finger spelling all the time. That's what you see a lot of with CODAs sometimes. So when CODAs grow up, they tend to transition more to English as their dominant language, their strong language. So the important point is that CODAs are bilingual, bimodal, native users of sign of ASL. ASL is their heritage language. Okay, are we on the same page? Can you accept that? Okay.